Ever expect students to pay back these loans without going into default? Chief Deputy Whip Congressman Peter Welch of Vermont is trying to get the House to extend the lower interest rate. Welcome, Peter. So where does this stand now, and what is the opposition? How in an environment when banks are paying, 1% or less on people's CDs, can the Republicans say we should be going from 3.5% to 7% for 10 million student loans?
Well, Joe Courtney of Connecticut has 126 sponsors for his legislation to keep those interest rates at 3.4%. And you laid it out pretty clearly. I mean, what we're doing is asking these kids who are getting out of college to start out life with a financial albatross anchored around their neck, and it's just not possible. It's tough for them. In Vermont, for instance, 70% of our graduating students have debt, Stafford loans. It averages about $30,000 for them. And, of course, in a tough job market, they're not certain they'll have a job. Entry-level wages when they get a job are low. So they have this huge debt. It's tough for them. It's also, by the way, very bad for the economy because they're not going to be able to make responsible purchases, a refrigerator, a car, things that you need getting started in life, and that hurts the economy. So there's a fundamental question here about the middle class. Are we going to have an economy where we make the investments in the future? And we all know you have to educate young people, your workforce, and you can't have them graduate with this debt peonage that just subjects them to a really impossible situation. Or are we going to give them a shot? One of the other important things is, go ahead.
Well, I was going to ask Peter, when it seems like the case is so clear for, especially at a time like this, for keeping interest rates lower on this, the Republican argument presumably is it's a matter of fiscal responsibility because it's going to add, $6 billion or something to taxpayers' burden over the next 10 years. But this is at the same time, right, that they're voting for a Ryan budget that would slash all the other stuff from low-income folks, from Medicaid, from food stamps. So this is just an echo of what we think are kind of regressive budget priorities?
Well, what it shows is how ideological the budget debate is, because the one thing that the Republicans won't do is deal with any change in the top-line budget number. They really just want to cut, cut, cut. And it is obviously absurd in this case, not only because the priority of education is important to everybody, Republicans and Democrats alike, but these are loans. This is not a grant. The government is borrowing at 2%. And I've had parents in Vermont come up to me and say, Peter, if the government's borrowing at 2%, why are you going to charge us 6.8%? And you know what? You don't have a good answer for that sensible question. So we can pay for this because the students who borrow the money pay for it. They're loans, they're not grants.
All right, let me bring in Molly Catchpole, Congressman. Stay tuned right there because I want you to be able to react. She gained notoriety when she took on Bank of America for its $5 debit card fees, and she won. She's also been fighting to keep student loan rates from rising and has more than $10 grand in Stafford loan debt herself. Molly's also taking on conservative Congresswoman Virginia Foxx for her comments about student loan debt on the Gordon Liddy radio show. You got to listen to this.
I have very little tolerance for people who tell me that they graduate with $200,000 of debt or even $80,000 of debt because there's no reason for that. The Declaration of Independence says life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness.
Yeah.
You don't sit on your butt and have it dumped in your lap.
Pretty condescending stuff, Molly. So, I mean, she's dissing students who now, I mean, back when Congresswoman Foxx went to college, college cost a lot less. So it's not the students' fault that they're taking on debt to get degrees that everyone is now expected to get if they're going to have some kind of meaningful career. Tell us what you're up to.
Right. So I work with a nonprofit called Rebuild a Dream, and we're really working on student loan debt right now. And this interest rate bill is our huge fight. And to hear a woman who's actually chair of the House Subcommittee on Higher Education make these remarks at a time when students are graduating off a cliff into huge unemployment rates, over $1 trillion in debt, it's really crazy to hear her say that. And what's worse is that it feels like nobody's really calling her out for that. We hear elected officials get away with saying things all the time that's just completely insane. So at Rebuild the Dream, we decided to launch a petition asking Speaker Boehner and the rest of Congress to denounce her completely out of line, out of touch remarks. and we're getting a really good response. So far, it's about 90,000 people have signed on.
That's terrific. Now,
yeah.
let me ask you, and Congressman, let me bring you back in for a second. One of the things, obviously, this whole interest rate issue is crucial in the near term, but if you step back to the big picture, this isn't doing anything to address the soaring cost of college. I know we've got some figures I want to put up where the costs now, if you compare the cost of the average four-year college, public or private, to the average family income in the U.S., it's about a quarter of the average family's income to go to public college these days, a four-year college, and it's over half the median income to go to a private college. Now, Congressman, what needs to be done about that? This is all important in the near term, but it just doesn't change that big picture at all.
Well, see, that's right. And, in fact, this is a place where we might be able to work with the Republicans if we could put down our ideological battle gear. If tuition is going up 8.5%, and that's what it was last year, that's way faster than the rate of inflation for everything else. It's not sustainable. And college costs have been going up much faster, even than health care. So that is simply something that can't continue. And we have to ask the administrators in higher education to do whatever is required to keep those tuition increases at or below inflation. So there's two things that have to happen. One, we do have to help students. We have to help them with subsidized loans. We have to try to get more grants available so students can meet the tuition. But number two, on the cost side, we really have to look to our higher education administrators to take a much more aggressive approach towards keeping those tuition increases at bay.
Now, Molly, I mean, you were in college much more recently. I can tell by looking at you. You're a graduate, but you've got a fair amount of debt, correct?
Oh, yes, I do. Yes.
Now, I guess my question is, do young people understand that back in the Nixon administration, Pell Grants actually covered something like 70 or 72% of the typical four-year public college tuition? Today, it covers much less than half of that. So even with the measures at the edge that Congressman Welch is importantly talking about in the next few months, the whole system has gotten out of whack in the last several decades. Are young people ginned up about that?
We know. It's frustrating, and you know, when I was in college, I had a lot of friends that had to stop going halfway through, or a year in, or 3 years in, because the cost was just too high, and they couldn't afford it. So maybe they'll go back to live years, but you know, it's really disheartening to see people have to stop going because they can't afford it. And actually, part of the other comments that Representative Fox had was that she worked her way through school. That was in 1968 when it was possible for most people to do that. And now I think you have a very small percentage of students who are able to do that successfully.
Now, just briefly, Congressman Welch, I want to put up, I had a chance to speak to Bob Kerrey recently, former senator running again, obviously, a man who I think is a terrific politician, who also ran the New School. Here's what he had to say about what's driving a big issue that's driving costs up. Give a listen. I want to get a quick last reaction.
The system is rigged against innovation. It's rigged. The federal law that creates a regulatory environment establishes a barrier to entry. We have approximately the same number of colleges and universities we've had over the last 50 years. What's changed is the feds then drive more demand in the system with student loans and Pell Grants and other programs.
So, Congressman, obviously, we don't have time to... Dylan will come back to these issues, I'm sure, on future shows. But just briefly, doesn't Bob Kerrey have a point that we've got a regulatory system that discourages innovation, and there's sort of a racket among the incumbent institutions that makes it hard for lower-cost providers to break in?
Well, he does have a point. He's focused on the cost side and the access side, and he's right about that. But, you know, the one answer that should be off limits is to just shift that burden in the failure of college administrators or politicians to deal with the situation, to shift that burden on the students. You know, Molly's right. I met a young woman this morning who's at the University of Vermont. She's working 2 jobs, and I just couldn't quite figure out how in the world she can study and do the 2 jobs. But what she told me was that she has to do that in order to try to be able to pay the bills and to meet her living expenses. So the students are working hard now, but what they make doesn't go as far as it did when I was a student to help pay for your cost.
We're going to have to leave it.
In all hands on.
We're going to have to leave it there. Just
all hands on deck situation.
For today, Congressman. Thank you, Congressman Peter Welch and Molly Clatchpole, for fighting the good fight from your different perches. We'll be coming back to this, Dylan will, I know. Coming up.